Hello, my name is Mendes Muñoz Yolotzen Patricia, and I will tell you about the early life of Antoni Gaudi. Antoni Gaudi was born on June 25, 1852, in Reus according to some biographies and in Riudoms according to others, a small town near Reus where his family spent the summer. He came from a family of boilermakers, a fact that allowed the young Antoni Gaudi to acquire a special ability to that space and volume, while helping his father and grandfather in the family workshop. His easy in conceiving spaces and transforming materials prospered until he became the genius and three-dimensional creation that he would later prove to be. Gaudi was a child with delicate health, which is why he was forced to spend long periods of rest in Mas de Riudoms, where he spent hours and more hours contemplating and retaining the secret of nature. He considered living nature is great teacher and transmitter of the higher knowledge, because it is the supreme work of the Creator. Thus, Gaudi found the essence and meaning of architecture in following its same patterns, always respecting its laws. It was a question, not of copying it, but of following its course through a cooperative process and, in this context, making its architecture the most beautiful, sustainable, and efficient work possible. For all this, Gaudi affirmed, originality consists in going back to the origin.
Hi, I'm Tania, and I'm going to talk about the maturity and death of Antoni Gaudi. I'm going to start with the time when he started his studies in architecture, because I think that was the moment when he gets his maturity. But in reality, he was always related to architecture because it was something that he was very passionate about. Gaudi moved to Barcelona in 1870 to begin his studies in architecture, and at the same time he had to work to pay for his studies because, as we all know, architecture is very expensive. Gaudi was an irregular student but with a great initiative to architecture and with revolutionary ideas. Actually, he was a student with a different way of thinking that even when he graduated, the director Elias Rogen declared, "I don't know if we have given the title to a madman or a genius, time will tell." And now with the time, we can say that Antoni Gaudi was a genius. Antoni Gaudi got his degree in architecture in 1878, and he began to be more independent when he created his architecture studio, his own architecture studio. And I think that he lived in the perfect time to show his talent in architecture, because in that moment, Barcelona was in a great moment with the Industrial Revolution, and that could be a great opportunity for him and his start in architecture. After, Gaudi met Eusebio Gell, who was a businessman, and he was his great friend too. And Gaudi and Gell were close friends, and some of the works created by Gaudi were for Gell and his family. Some of the works created by Gaudi were for Gell are Pavillons Well, Gell Palace, Gaudi Crypt, Park Girl. And finally, Charlotte the Cathedral. And since Gaudi was young, he was familiar with Gothic and Muslim architectural styles, and that helped him to create his architectural style. And a few years later, in 1883, Gaudi was in charge of the construction of the Sagrada Familia Cathedral, which is his most important work. And finally, I'm going to talk about his death. And personally, I think the Gaudi's death was sudden because he died in accident. And Antoni Gaudi died on June 10 in 1926 in an accident where he was hit by a train while Gaudi was on his way to the Sagrada Familia from the church of St. Felipe Neri. And after the blow, Gaudi lost consciousness and no one suspected who he was. Even those people present at the accident believed that he was a homeless man until he was recognized in the hospital by the priest of the Sagrada Familia. And later, Gaudi had his funeral in the Cathedral of the Sagrada Familia, where his memory and his legacy in architecture will remain.
Curiosity of Gaudi. He was a sickly child. A rheumatic problem prevented him from playing with other children on the street. This condition will help him in the future in architecture. The impossibility of moving normally caused him an interest in observing nature that he will later use prolifically in his work. It didn't have the approval of the official institutions. Despite being recognized worldwide and revolutionary architect, the lack of recognition by official bodies accompanied him throughout his life. Despite this, he always had patrons around him who praised, encouraged, and financed his work. Eusebio Caldwell was his close friend and protector. They met when the architect was 26 years old and had a mutual admiration relationship. Gaudi did not design his works in plans. Gaudi had an innate sense of geometry and volume and applied it with great skill and imaginative capacity. Their structures were generally created in 3 dimensions. He did not design his works in plans, but he did it on 3D models with all kinds of detail. Gaudi did not design his works in plans. Gaudi had an innate sense of geometry and volume and applied it with great skill and imaginative capacity. Their structures were generally created in 3 dimensions. He did not design his works in plans, but he did it on 3D models with all kinds of detail. This helped his collaborators, who could see them as he had projected them in his mind. Gaudi studied even the smallest detail of his creations, integrating into the architecture a whole series of handicraft that he himself mastered to perfection. 7 works by Gaudi are World Heritage Sites. 7 buildings built by the architect have been inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List, all of them located in Barcelona, and them help create an identity among other Spanish cities. The monuments are Park Güell, Güell Palace, Casa Milà, Casa Vicens, Gaudi's work on the Nativity, Fayette and the Sagrada Familia Crypt, Casa Batlló, and the Colonia Güell Crypt. Gaudi's workshop was looted. Gaudi spent the last year of his life immersed in what would become his master project, the Sagrada Familia. He came to install his workshop and home inside. When the Spanish Civil War broke out, his house workshop was looted, burning documents and destroying models that Gaudi kept. This caused his disciples to have had difficulty to give continuity to the construction of the Sagrada Familia. Gaudi had an aversion to traveling. His figure is styled wrapped in a certain personal mystery that he himself cultivated in the last year of his life. His well-known aversion to traveling led to the majority of his projects being located in Catalonia and particularly in Barcelona. Had a great impossible love. Only one woman is known who received a firm marriage proposal from Gaudi and was rejected. Pepeta Moreu was the great impossible love of the architect. Historians say that Pepeta admired the great artist, but didn't like the man, not very careful of his person and disheveled. Pepeta's refusal was a blow to Gaudi and led him to take refuge in mysticism and religion, concentrating on the Sagrada Familia until the end of his days.
Hello, my name is Alberto Vega, and I will talk about Gaudi's style. Gaudi's and modernism. Gaudi's professional life was distinctive in that he has never stopped to investigate mechanical building structures. Early on, Gaudi was inspired by Oriental arts, India, Persian, and Japan. Through the study of the historicist architectural theoreticals, such as Walter Patters, John Ruskin, and William Morris. Okay. The Oriental movement. The influence of the Oriental movement can be seen in words like the Capricho, the Well Palace is here, and the Casa Vicens. The Neo-Gothics. Later on, he joined to the Neo-Gothic movement that was in fashion at the time, following the ideas of the French architect Eugène Bayonnet-Leduc. Is here. Okay. This influence is reflected in the Theresia College, the Episcopal Palace in Astorga, the Botines House, and the Bellos Guard House, and the upset of the Sagrada Familia. The organic style. Eventuality, Gaudi got started on a more personal state with the organic style inspired by natural, in which he will build his major works. Casa Milan is there. Gothic revival. Undoubtedly, the style that most influenced time was the Gothic revival, promoted in the latter half of the 19th century by the theoretical works of Eugène Bayonnet-Leduc. The French architect called for studying the styles of the past and adapting them in a rational manner, taking into account both structure and design. Nonetheless, for Gaudi the Gothic style was imperfect because, despite the effectiveness of some of the structural solution, it was art that had yet to be perfect. After this initial influence, Gaudi moved towards modernism. Then, in its heyday, Modernism in its earlier stages was inspired by historic architecture. His practitioners saw its returns to the past a response to the industrial reforms imposed by the Industrial Revolution technological advance. Some essential features of modernism were an anti-class language inherited from Romanticism, with a tendency to lyrics and subjectivity. The determinate connection of architecture with the applied arts and artistic work that produce an overtly ornamental style.
Now I'm going to talk about Casa Batlló by Antoni Gaudi. The current Casa Batlló is the result of the reconstruction of an old house in 1877 by Emilio Sala Cortés. Gaudi received the order for the total renovation of the property from the owner Josep Batlló Casanovas. On this property, Gaudi built one of the most famous and special houses in Barcelona. The house is located at the number 43 on Paseo de Gracia in Barcelona, Catalonia, Spain, on the island of houses known as the Apple of Discord for having buildings of different architectural styles. Antoni Gaudi's project in 1904 was strongly questioned by municipal authorities because a series of elements in Gaudi's design exceeded the limits of municipal ordinances. The organic forms that Gaudi used in the restoration of Casa Batlló bring a whole symbolic universe of marine inspiration that transport you to a world of enchanted and fantastic landscapes. Casa Batlló is a masterpiece of form, color, and light in which, with his modern idea of ventilation, Gaudi anticipates the thesis of rationalism, which will arrive 30 years later. The changes made by Gaudi in the old building were radical and completely modified. In fact, it is a new building. The main floor had to be to the home of Batlló, Mr. Batlló and his family, and the other 4 floors will be divided into 2 floors each for rent. Gaudi carried out a comprehensive reform. At the front of the house, he added a grandstand, new balconies, and polychrome ceramics. Inside, he reorganized the space, unifying the existing staircase and patio for more lighting and ventilation. In the restoration, a 5th floor was added to the residence, which at the time has intended for service persons. The basement where the storage room and coal bunkers were located. The ground floor was dedicated to parking, garage, and street level. Restructured the floor nobleman, he expanded the center patio of lights, redone both the rear and main facades, and built a new roof. The house has an area of 4,300 meters, 32 meters height and 14.5 meters wide. Consists of a basement, ground floor, main floor with patio, 4 entries, floors, loft and roof terrace, private access to the main floor, and a neighboring staircase that is run out a wheelnet patio and lights, as does the elevator. Something important to highlight is the front of the house, because it is covered with mosaics of splendid colors and is probably the most suggestive, creative, and original in the city. The balconies look like skull fragments with the openings from the eyes and nose. The slabs of the balconies were replaced by curved ones, and the famous railing were placed on top that so many interpretations have originated. All the balconies except for the one in the attic or a double one below the tower with the cross are the same size. The climbing of the facade and ornamental details that together with the mask of its 7 balconies, the terrace balcony and the flower-shaped attic balcony that give the building a dreamlike appearance, was made of crushed glass and colored ceramics placed on top, lime mortar and 300 um, dirty ceramics discs of different colors and sizes of 50, 21, 27, and 35 centimeters were spread over them. The roof that crowns the residence is one of Gaudi's most characteristic for urban buildings, culminating in an undulating shape, reminiscent of the arched back of a dragon. It is covered with ceramic tiles that looks like scales. This original roof contains a large loft in the line of that of the last wall. All these lofts are built with exposed bricks arranged in the shape of arches with a great bearing force. On one side of the roof there is a tower with the typical Gaudi 4-armed cross, indicating the 4 cardinal points. Another of the case points in the restoration carried out in Casa Batlló correspond to the wedding of the patio of lights, in whose center the elevator was placed, whose wooden cabin has continued to operate over the years, covered with a large central skylight whose windows are smaller in the upper part, where more light penetrates. They enlarge as one descends. The entry patio is covered with embossed ceramics in blue tones, more intensive in the upper part and lighter in the lower part, thus achieving a uniform distribution of light. The interior is also very imaginative and presents a variety of decorative elements such as furniture, decorated stained glass windows, ground iron elements, hearths, etc. Gaudi paid particular attention to the first floor, the noble floor, that the Batlló family would occupy with a special arrangement of the ceiling and decoration with generally originally shapes and careful design spaces. What in principle was a simple reform of an already built building gave Gaudi the opportunity to create one of his most poetic and decorative works. In 2005, Casa Batlló was listed by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site.
Now, I'm going to talk about Antoni Gaudi's projects. Number 1, Park Wall. Gaudi's architectural works are recognized by incorporating constructive solutions, inspired by nature and religion. Park Wall is an example of this. Gaudi built his project in Barcelona. The project consists of taking the English Garden City as a model. The park owns is named to USB Well, a wealthy businessman who commissioned Gaudi for the project. In addition, Gaudi was inspired by the Temple of Apollo at Delphi for his conception of the park. It was built at the time when the architect perfected his architectural style, drawing inspiration from the organic forms of nature. Gaudi used a series of new structural solutions derived from his in-depth analysis of geometry. Consequently, the first challenge that the architect had was to provide a sloping terrain. It raised the high bar from 150 to 210 meters. The architect was strict against creating an uniform terrain and managed to preserve the identity of a natural viewpoint over the city. And for this purpose, he made nature become architecture, and that architecture was one more piece within the natural order. The park was conceived as structure complex, where the house would be located. However, despite Gaudi's works and dedication of this park, the project turned out to be a commercial failure. He removed from the city center of Barcelona, as well as the start of the First World War, generate uncertainty and made that only 2 of 60 plots of the complex were sold. The current Gaudi House Museum was built in one of these lands, where the architect lived between 1906 and 1925, and the other was acquired by the lawyer Marty Trice, a friend of the architect. The commercial idea was bad, but it's in the part well where Gaudi reveals his entire architectural idea and uses the immense repertoire of special structural and material solutions. He also incorporates an idea of symbolism and character, making each project unique according to each idea and concept that you want to give it. In conclusion, his respect and appreciation for nature, of which he was not just a spectator, but a constant evolving learner, made a difference with the usual architectural style. Another example of Gaudi's architectural style is the House Mila, with wavy and lively shapes allusive to sea and plant motifs. For example, the design was inspired by the Nervine Mountains of Montserrat. The House Mila was one of the paradigmatic work of Catalan modernism, and perhaps the building that best synthesizes all the architectural elements used by Antoni Gaudi. Through the uses of geometry, Gaudi gave House Mila a constant movement, inspired by elements of nature, both in the forms and in the decoration. The facade enjoys unique creative freedom because it's not a structural element. It's wavy design which simulates the waves of the sea, causes with a contrast of the light and darkness, as daylight passes. This innovation of dynamism in the forms finish of the wrought iron balconies and decorate with the abstract motifs made the large construction acquire its own and differentiated personality. Therefore, when it was built, it had many criticisms. It was the object of public ridicule, characterized in various publications. Over the time, architectural ideas have been transformed. The architecture has changed, and now the building looks for a different way to improve the volumetry and capture the attention, in addition to being able to use an urban environment and not use simple forms that seem boring. We can conclude that House Mila marked an innovation idea, the architectonic style of Gaudi. He combines in luxurious harmony, the ornamental components, the meticulous care of their function, and the constructive elements. Conclusion: Gaudi respect and appreciation for nature, of which he was not a mere spectator, but an apprentice in constant evolution. He made a difference with the usual architectural styles. Gaudi didn't see nature as monotonous or uniform object, but rather sought to understand it in all its nuances and deepens its transformation. He took it as a reference and source of inspiration in his works. He reinterpreted in reference and in usual ways, breaking with the pre-established paradigms, leaving an idea for the future architects to innovate in architectural trends, and that we must be true to our ideals. And this is all for this presentation. Thanks for your attention.